Sometimes you can meet somebody and they sing or they say something and they can change the way you look for a long time. So yes, I am from a North Indian family, and from a family that is a Hindu family, a family that in some senses belongs to the region of Punjab. And one half of my family, my father's family, was in the part of Punjab that was that is now in Pakistan. So when in 1947 the partition took place and the British left, and we then suddenly had three countries, or rather two countries, West Pakistan and East Pakistan and India. So my father's family, like several hundreds of other families, had to cross over as refugees and start all over again. We have not lived in trauma. So I'm not a suffering guy, and we are not a suffering refugee family. What I work on is essentially because I'm responding. I get upset at violence, and I try and understand why somebody hurts somebody. And in the same way, when you try and answer that question, you end up also asking what's the meaning of anybody's existence. 84 was the anti-Sikh riots, or rather the anti-Sikh killings in Delhi. As a student, we all saw almost 3,000 people were killed in your own city in 3 days, in your capital city. And then a few weeks later, you saw a U.S. company chemical plant responsible for several thousand people being killed and injured and diseased for generations. And you saw a government and you saw a society that actually didn't punish anybody. Ten years later, you do a film in which you try and think about what's the meaning of violence, where does all the anger come from, what's the cycle of violence. This was the funeral procession of the leader of a political movement which was probably the strongest, largest non-violent mass movement post-1947, post the independence in India. And this was 1991, which was actually the beginning of, in a sense, the opening up of the Indian economy and the Indian market to Western and international capital. And the Chhattisgarh Mukti Morcha, that's the name of the organization, was in a sense responsible for protecting this entire area. And it was necessary. It was necessary for the political parties, for the police, for international companies, that if they wanted access to the natural resources of this area, if they wanted the minerals, if they wanted the water, if they wanted the land, they had to get rid of him. And they had to break this whole process and this movement, and which was why he was assassinated in 1991. And for a whole set of reasons, which are too long to go into at this point, I found myself there filming this procession. It was that one day when I actually saw, I saw more than 100,000 people grieving out in the streets, just sitting on the roads and in shock and in sorrow. And it was necessary to understand why and who were these people and what did they feel. And I went back and filmed more and so on. 10 years later, 2000, 2001, I find myself in similar situations in different parts of the country. There's a proposal to take over the entire coastal belt and turn it into a very major international port. The local population, the fishermen there, the farmers there, they all are coming together to prevent this from happening and to protect their township. This is the beginning of the India that you're now seeing. Colonel Saiz he's probably the most literate man in the village. He's a retired colonel in the Indian Army who goes back after 40 years as a soldier defending the nation. He joins the organization, he becomes one of its spokesmen. Within several months, he's arrested by the Indian police, taken to jail, tortured, killed in custody in jail with witnesses, and essentially because they wanted to build the port. The port did not come up. As of today, the port has not come up. So in a sense, his death did not go waste. But the fact is that in the center of town, right in the center of the street, is a little circle. In the circle, there's a little pillar. On the pillar is a little photograph. And that's the photograph of Colonel Saiz. And so when people come there, they touch it, they touch their foreheads, just like you would do at an altar, just like you would go to a temple. And I'll say these are shrines, these are temples of modern India. If I were to remember, then yes, in 1996, 97, I began working on another film. It was a film about violence, it was a film about thinking through violence. And so it started on the India-Pakistan border. It ended on the India-Pakistan border. It looked at questions of violence and non-violence, and it seemed at one level, sometimes people say, oh, this is a film about partition of India. But it's also about the Tibetans. And it's also about my father and my mother. So the poster that you saw on the wall is of a hill called Bapli Mali 173. It's about a film that I did called Bapli Mali 173. Bapli Mali was the name of this hill, and 173 was the 173 million tons of bauxite in it. Find that the hill that you lived next to, where your home is, under that hill, has been sold. 81 million tons of bauxite, 91 million tons of bauxite, 173 million tons of bauxite. And you wake up and you find that the entire hill range has been sold. So the growing economy, the great Indian economy, maybe you just take a look at this and you'll see where it gets its wealth from. An international feminist movement impacts upon my family. And the impact of that on my family makes me confront, makes me question, makes me see so many things about myself, about relationships, about the relationship between my parents, about the relationship between my partner and me, and my daughter and me, and so on and so forth. It's essentially because you are forced every day, every hour to see how the politics of power plays out. So in many ways for me the lightning testimonies is about trying to understand and responding to and being impacted upon by the feminist movement. Sexual violence against women, or sexual violence per se, has a very long and old history. I read and I heard in 2002 in Western India, in Gujarat, when the massacres took place, there was a celebration of sexual violence. There was a public celebration, there was a public display of sexual violence. And it didn't really matter that this was something that had been happening for many years in different parts of the world, but it seemed necessary to understand as to what was it that could make men celebrate something that was so horrible. I began to look at experiences. When something happens, it disappears after a while. That supposedly did not exist. And slowly over a period of time, I began to learn that there were many ways in which people remembered things. Different communities, different individuals archived and recalled differently. I found that there were vocabularies, there were languages, there were places, there were homes where the experience would go and hide. Would it hide forever? No. Narratives of suffering, what seemed to be a collection of experiences that kept targeting the female body and made the female body as a space of continued humiliation, and how the same body without any clothes on, actually from being a site of humiliation actually becomes a site of dignity and a space for dignity. Sometimes when you're living, you find that you cannot make sense of what is happening. Many things are happening and they're all happening in different directions. The Lighting Testimonies is 8 channels, 8 screens. When it begins identically. You have identical sound, you have identical image. It then disintegrates. When the lady hangs the cloth on the clothesline, it disintegrates into 8 different stories. What went on gets reversed. And in this last 8th screen, you see the meaning of dignity. You see the power of dignity. You see the power of self-respect. 2008 September, which is going to be the first anniversary of the September uprising in Myanmar, in Burma, when the monks came out. And I have also been working on small films to do with understanding what happened inside Burma over the last few years. And I hope that once again we can, come out with a series of images and a series of films that mark and commemorate the September uprising. Again, these are shrines. Again, these are temples. These are temples of modern South Asia, in a sense. And I think it's necessary to start looking at this as a region. And this has, if you really need to understand it, you need to see it as a region.